Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a people living on an island. There were many, many people, perhaps 100,000 of them. They lived contentedly on this island until one day a ship anchored offshore. Ships had visited their island before, but this ship was different because it brought people from the outside who intended to stay. There weren't very many of these people, just 40 of them altogether, but they had scary weapons. Soon these people scattered throughout the island, telling the island people that they were there to help them. But instead, a long war broke out that lasted 30 or 40 years. When it was over, most of the island people were dead. And those who survived were forced to shed their customs, wear clothes, and obey the new conquerors of their island. Is this history or a fairy tale? A version of this is found in the first histories of the Marianas that I read back in the 1960s and 70s. Something close to this version is accepted by many people even today. But there are plenty of unanswered questions. How did 40 people conquer an island group with a gigantic population? The weapons must have been really powerful. Or perhaps the newcomers were a super race. What were the island people thinking when they let these newcomers on their island in the first place? Why did they let them stay? Is it possible that many of the island people joined the newcomers? Then too, could it be that some of the newcomers joined the island people? Were there reasons for welcoming the newcomers? Is it possible that perhaps the newcomers really did help the island people, despite the many deaths? It's time to begin serious historic exploration into the events surrounding the arrival of Padre Luis Diego Sanvitores and his party in 1668, a party that included 6 Jesuits and 31 lay missionaries. What do we know? We know that the original island population of perhaps 40,000 was reduced to 4,000 40 years later, and that the Spaniards were in charge. So what happened to bring about this upheaval? Let's take a closer look at the facts. First, there were no troops with Sanvitores, just Filipinos and Mexicans, chosen for their trade and for their faith. They included a woman, 2 12-year-old boys chosen for their singing voices, a 60-year-old farmer, and other tradesmen. They were chosen for their Christian lives and their skills, not their military prowess. The muskets were frightening at first, but not too useful in real encounters, especially in canoes, as the Filipinos and Mexicans soon found out. Violence, for the most part, was provoked by cultural clashes and by personal offense that was given, especially when the mission bands started breaking up the ancestral skulls that the people reverenced. All these offenses built up resentment in some of the island people. Guamanians could have easily wiped out the missionaries and their helpers if they really wanted to. 3 times they gathered in sufficient force outside the mission center in Hagatna. 1671, 1676, 1685. Muskets or not, the Spanish party was outnumbered 20 to 1. But wiping out the opposition was not the way islanders conducted warfare. The normal pattern of warfare was a display, a show of strength, perhaps the loss of a couple lives, and then a settlement. This was how island warfare has always been conducted. Mass slaughter would have defeated the purpose of the missionaries themselves, since they were there to save souls, not to consign them to hell, according to the beliefs in those days. So the missionaries were quick to complain when the troops, who first arrived 8 years after the mission started, took lives recklessly. But even if the islanders had adopted European-style warfare, they would not have wiped out the newcomers for two reasons. First, they found something that the foreigners offered that they really wanted. Not just the belief system and the faith, but iron, hoop, corn cultivation, cloth and weaving, and so many other things. Second, the foreigners were already being protected by local allies, men leading the local militia, people like Ignacio Hineti, Antonio Ahi, Alonso Soon, Ignacio Nuun. The island was never politically united, and the loosely organized village system gave rise to such divisions. When troops finally were sent to the islands from the mid-1670s on, they were beset by their own problems. Lack of training, poverty, disagreement with their officers. Many of them were outright useless. Some preyed on the local community, but many more, about 60 by the end of the century, established strong links with the island community by marrying local women. By the end of the period of intermittent hostilities, between 1668 to 1698, that's 30 years, about 120 Chamorros had lost their lives in violence. The foreigners had lost themselves about 60 or 70 people. The yearly death toll over the whole 30-year period then was about 4 islanders and 2 foreigners each year. By 1700, a new cultural and political system was in place. This system was a combination of the new and the old. Examples? Well, the titles. They were maintained but changed. The officials. The moving back and forth between the town and the village, the lanchu, began at that time. The continuing importance of the woman's line, but using of the man's last name. Survival of the cultural place of death and honoring the deceased family, but this time through the church. This suggests that the new cultural forms included an altered form of the traditional rather than an abandonment of the old. The old was kept, but just under a new form. In the end, islanders did not simply roll over and play dead. Local people had their reasons for their early choices. They were real-life figures, not just this faceless and feckless group of people who allowed outsiders to come in and impose their will, regardless of how ineffective their muskets might have been. On every page of the historical sources, there are hints, sometimes outright screams, that people had their own strategic responses to Spanish moves. Often enough, the islanders organized their own initiatives as well. Perhaps it's an injustice to present the people of these islands as helpless victims who have been deprived of what is most meaningful, their cultural heritage. Perhaps it's an injustice to present the people of these islands as hapless victims who have been deprived of what is most meaningful, their cultural heritage, their land, their identity. Can we do just a bit more to show how active and resilient they were? But to do so, we'll have to give up some of our cherished myths, our fairy tales. And we will have to develop the skill of reading between the lines to intuit what those who did not write these sources were really trying to do.